All right. Hello, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Abdel Jabbar. I am a support engineer at Grandstream Networks, and I am glad to have you here with me today. So we are going to talk about the configuration and deployment of GWN access points and share some recommendations on how to plan and optimize your wireless network. So this is going to be a mini training session about the initial setup of GWN APs. This is not a certification training, but at the end of this webinar, I will guide you on how to register for an online class and take the GCS certification exam. Before we start our presentation, I would like to mention that you can use the group chat or the Q&A section to submit your questions, and I'm joined by my colleague, Danny, who will be helping with your questions. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So as you might know, designing a wireless network involves a lot of factors that must be taken into consideration to determine the best way to optimize the wireless network. For example, by identifying the number of access points needed for the deployment, as well as the ideal placement of these access points. And the best way to determine that is by running a site survey. And the type of site survey that we're going to be talking about today is predictive site survey, which is a virtual survey that is conducted off-site, and it uses the facility floor plan or blueprint and some relevant information to determine some useful results, such as the number of access points needed and their optimal placement. This type of site survey is usually completed with a software tool that simulates the signal coverage based on the information you feed into that tool. All right. So unfortunately, not all installers have these tools, maybe because they are too expensive or not enough budget to run a survey. So these are some variables that must be accounted for when conducting a site survey, with or without a software tool. Studying the floor plan or even a site visit can be used to gather useful information about the radio frequency conditions, such as nearby interference produced by neighboring wireless networks, also checking the facility boundaries to determine whether outdoor APs will be required, and confirm there is no radar activity close by, because this is important, especially if you plan to enable DFS channels on 5 gigahertz. So these are just a few examples of the things that you need to look for. Taking notice of the building materials used in the facility will help you predict the signal behavior and visualize potential limitations for AP mounting, for example. And the different obstacles located between the access point and the wireless clients may reduce the signal strength because these materials absorb a part of the signal as it passes through them. And this happens at various rates based on the type of material. And we're going to talk more about this in a moment. Considering client capacity and estimating the number of wireless clients that will be accessing the wireless network can help you determine the area where you need to deploy more access points. So in our example, we can see that the area with the cubicles will have multiple users with eventually more wireless devices. So that tells us that this area is a high density area that will require 2 or more high density access points. So also identifying the type of applications and wireless solutions is also important to determine the amount of bandwidth required and whether QoS for such application is needed. Also, you learn about the stations and the wireless standards they support. For example, you can't configure the APs to use 802.11ac only while you have clients with the wireless cards that support only 2.4 gigahertz, because these clients will never be able to connect on 5 gigahertz. So after you determine the variables that we have explained so far, then you can design the AP layout. Of course, you want to cover the entire surveyed area with a strong signal. And the floor plan and the collected information can form the basis for determining the optimal coverage and bandwidth needed based on the number and type of wireless clients. For example, in the cubicle area, we can deploy 3 high-density access points to ensure speed and coverage. So selecting the right access point model for your deployment is also important. For instance, in a high-density area, you want to go with the high-density access points that has more spatial streams and provides higher speed. Wireless network segmentation is another thing that you need to plan for. For instance, how many SSIDs will be needed, and is there going to be a need for VLANs? One thing to keep in mind is that the more SSIDs you create, the more overhead you add to your wireless network, because each SSID that you create needs to broadcast its unique beacon frame. So radio frequency signal attenuation occurs naturally with distance. And when you have obstacles between the access point and the client, attenuation gets more significant because as a signal passes through this object, part of that signal is absorbed. So the figures shown here summarize relative attenuation values from common building materials. And as you can see, walls, especially concrete walls and reinforced concrete walls, they yield the greatest signal attenuation as compared to the other material types. So while considering the different building materials and their thickness can be helpful for, I would say, estimation purposes, post-deployment validation and testing in the physical facility is the best way to determine whether or not wireless communication will be successful across the rooms and the areas. In many cases where you have like a signal attenuation like high, the wireless administrators, they resort to increasing the radio power of the access point. The problem with that is when you increase the radio power of the access point, the signal from the access point is able to reach the client, and the clients can detect the signal with a good RSSI value. However, when the signal or the transmission from the wireless client to the access point might not have enough strength to reach the access point. And this can increase the retransmission rate, which can eventually slow down the wireless connection. And in some cases, the wireless client may not even connect to the access point. So adjusting radio power on the access point is something that needs to be designed with caution. Also, when you increase the radio power, it's not only enough to check the RSSI indicator on the wireless device, but also you want to go to the access point and the client, something I'm going to show you during live demonstration, and also check the RSSI detected from that client. So if you notice that the RSSI is good at the client side, but at the access point is weak, that's an indication that the transmission from the wireless client is getting attenuated before reaching the access point. We talked about AP selection. So Grandstream offers a wide range of access points that are designed to fit different types of deployments, from low density access points to medium density to high density access point. And usually when you want to decide on which access point to use, you look at the capacity and the speed. And as you can see, there is a correlation between the number of antennas or spatial streams supported on the access point and the capacity and the speed. So the more spatial streams we have, the higher the data rate and the higher the wireless capacity. And also you want to look at whether you want to deploy Wi-Fi 6 access points or you just want to stick with the other standards like 802.11n and 802.11ac. Okay, so after you decide which models to use and how many access points you're going to need for your deployments, the next question would be, how do you want to manage these access points? And Grandstream offers two options. There is local management and cloud management. The local management can be done via the built-in controller that is available on all the GWN access points. So basically, you just choose one of the access points and you use it as the controller of all the other access points in the same local area. In case you have more than 50 access points, because that's the maximum that a built-in controller can manage, Grandstream also offers GWN Manager, which is a free software that you can download from the Grandstream website, and you can install it on a Linux machine, and it allows you to manage up to 3,000 access points deployed in the same local area network. In case you want to use the cloud management, Grandstream offers the GW1 Cloud, which is a free service. You just sign up for free, and you can start adding your GWN access point and managing them from one single interface. The advantage of using the cloud management is that you can use it to manage multiple locations, networks, and sites, and there is no limit to how many access points you can manage from the GWN cloud. So for today's demonstration, I will use the GWN cloud and show you how to add the GWN access points, how to configure the parameters related to the access point, as well as the parameters related to the SSID. All right. So this is my account on GWN Cloud. As I mentioned, you can simply go to gwn.cloud and you can create a free account and you can start adding your GWN access point. The first thing when you log into your GWN .cloud is you need to choose or create a network where you want to deploy your access points. And this is useful, especially if you're an installer and you manage multiple locations. You can create a network for each client and then assign these access points to the designated networks. So for this demonstration, I'm just going to use the default one. And adding access points is the next step. So if I go to configuration, as you can see, I already have 3 access points added to my account. So adding access points to your GWN account is a simple process. You simply click on add, and you can enter that information manually by entering the MAC address and the associated password. And these 2 pieces of information are available on the sticker in the back of the access point. So this is this is the option to add one at a time. There's also the option to import. In case you want to add 100 access points, you simply populate that information in the CSV file and you upload it using this option. GWN also gives you a template that you can use for that purpose. One thing that I recommend in case you have many access points, you can also use the GWN.cloud app, which has a built-in scanner, and it allows you to simply scan the barcode in the box or in the back of the access point to add them automatically to the designated network on your GWN profile. So I already have 3 access points added to my GWN account. To edit the parameters associated with these access points, you just click on edit. So if you notice here, a lot of the options here, they have system settings or radio settings. So I'm going to close that one and I want to go back here to the radio tab. So this configuration page, or the radio configuration page, works as the global template for all the access points that you add into this network. So every time you add an access point to that network, it will apply these global settings. So in case you want to make changes to these global settings or global templates, you just go to radio and you start making those changes. So the changes that you apply here apply to all the GWN access points. And if you want to make specific changes to specific access points, we can always go back to the configuration and choose the access point that we would like to apply the configuration to. And the access point configuration overrides the global configuration provisioned through the radio configuration page. So let's take a look at these settings so we can understand when and how to enable them. And what are the benefits, of course, and the disadvantages of enabling these features. So the first one here is band steering. And band steering is a feature that is built into all the access points. So you basically tell the access point to prioritize specific band over the other. We have 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. So for example, if you set it to 5 gigahertz in priority, if you have a client that only supports 2.4 gigahertz, that client will still be able to connect. However, when devices try to connect to the access point will always wait to see if that wireless client will request connection over 5 gigahertz band. The benefit of using band steering is that you can prioritize, like for example, 5 gigahertz in a dense environment, or if you have an issue with the coverage range, you can use 2.4 gigahertz to prioritize it. And just one thing to keep in mind when enabling band steering with mobile devices, it can sometimes slow down the roaming process. Because if you have, for example, 2.4 gigahertz enabled on the access point as priority, and while the device is roaming and trying to scan for 5 gigahertz, the access point will be slow to respond to that mobile device. So if you want to use, for example, 2.4 in priority in band steering, at least make sure that the mobile devices are configured to only use 2.4 gigahertz. There's also the option of band steering. Once you enable this option, there are two other settings that show up, the capacity and the RSSI threshold. So basically you tell the access point when the RSSI from the wireless client reaches -75, you need to send that wireless client to another access point that provides a better RSSI. And also when you configure 30, that means once an access point has 30 clients, this access point will start steering wireless devices to other access points. These settings need to be implemented with a lot of caution. So I'm just going to leave that stuff as the default. There is the beacon interval, which is 100 milliseconds. So I'm just going to leave it that one. I don't want to change it. There is the Wi-Fi 5 compatible mode. By default, it's unchecked because this is a Wi-Fi 6 capable access point that I'm connected to because I have 7660. So in case you want to disable Wi-Fi 6 and only use Wi-Fi 5, you can check this option because there are some legacy devices who still don't know how to handle those like headers introduced in Wi-Fi 6. And that's the only reason where you need to check this option. When it comes to channel width, we did a video about Wi-Fi frequency. I think it's available on our YouTube channel, Wi-Fi frequency bands. If you want to learn more about these bands, you can watch this video. But in general, when you want to use channel width, because 2.4 gigahertz, for example, only gives us 3 non-overlapping channel. So we always want to use 20 megahertz because that's the ideal one. If we increase it to 40 megahertz, we end up with only one channel, and that's the problem when you deploy multiple access points. So it's always better to use 20 megahertz. The channel, by default, it's set to auto, and the GWN access points are built with something that we call DCA, or dynamic channel assignment. So the access point will scan its surrounding or its neighboring access point to detect which channels are being used by these access points, and eventually it will decide to use the channel that is less crowded. Uh, for the general or the global settings, I would recommend leave it as auto, and you can go back to the access points configuration page and change those if you see fit. Radio power is one of the things that you must always configure when you deploy your access points. And I'm going to give you an example here. So let's go back to our slide here. So if you remember, we deployed multiple access points. And this is just for demonstration purposes, because in the real world, you never have like a Wi-Fi signal that radiates in a perfect circle shape. So this is just for demonstration purposes. So we have all these access points deployed with high radio power. And what happens, these access points, these three right here, so here each color, by the way, represents a channel. So here in this example, we're using 2.4 bands. So we have 3 non-overlapping channel. That's the maximum. And each color represents a channel. So when you have the 3 access points that are broadcasting on the same channel, having their signal set at high, the signal from these access points will overlap, which will cause what we call co-channel interference. And co-channel interference is basically when you have 2 access points competing over the same channel medium or the wireless medium. So in this case, what we need to do is we need to reduce the transmission power of these 2 access points. The other problem that can happen, even if when you don't have access points that are using the same channel, for example, in this cubicle area, you might end up with what we call sticky clients. Is when you have a client that is sitting close to an access point that can provide a better signal, but instead it is connecting to an access point that is further away. And the reason why that happens, because the radio power from this access point is too powerful that this client thinks that this access point is actually in close proximity. So these are one of the things that we need to change. So in our example, these 3 access points in the cubicle area, we need to reduce the radio power to low, as well as the access point in the video conferencing room and in the training room, because we only need to cover a small room. So this is how it gets after you reduce the radio power. So we got rid of the co-channel interference here and the other one that was here. And now this client will not be able to connect to this access point because it's within the range of this access point and it's only able to see this access point. And that's basically what we want. So when you reduce the radio power of the access points, another thing that you need to check is the RSSI. You always want to have an RSSI that is no greater or no less than minus 70 dBm. So every time you reach an area where you have an RSSI of minus 70 dBm, you want to have another access point that provides a better RSSI, maybe minus 65 or minus 68. So that's something that you want to check when you adjust your radio power. So let's go back to our configuration. So now that we explained that radio power in most of the deployments need to be changed. You need to change the value. There's the option enable short guard interval. So this is basically the pause between symbols. So when you set it to short guard interval, you reduce it to 400 nanoseconds instead of 800. So you basically increase the speed by like 5 to 10%. But if you have the access points deployed in an area where the signal takes different paths, this behavior can cause actually the frames to arrive with delay. So in that case, we want to uncheck this box. So there is no universal setting when it comes to wireless deployments that I would tell you, for example, always do this, because all configuration parameters depend on your environment. So I'm just going to keep that one here. Allow legacy devices. So for example, as we know, the 802.11b, the devices that support that standard, they can only transmit at 11 megabits per second. So when you have devices that transmit at a low rate in your network, they will slow down the devices that transmit at high speed. That's something to always keep in mind, because the low speed devices or solutions, they will take more time to transmit their data. And I think there is one setting here that I forgot to cover, which is airtime fairness. So let's go back to the slide so we can explain this, how airtime fairness works. So when you have, as I mentioned, like devices that transmit at high speed and devices that transmit at low rate, what happens, the low rate devices will take more time to transmit their data compared to the high rate devices. In our example, these are only for illustration purposes again. So this one will take 8 seconds to transmit 7 megabytes of data, while the high rate device, this computer, will take only 4 seconds to transmit 90 megabytes. So if you notice here, the high rate device will need to wait 8 seconds to resend whatever information or data it needs to transmit. So when you enable airtime fairness, you basically divide the time between the two. So the high rate device will not have to wait for 8 seconds. So they're going to use equal time to send their data. The advantage of airtime fairness when you enable it is that the high rate devices will not get slowed down by slow devices. However, when you also enable it, the slow devices will become even slower because now they have less airtime to use to transmit the data. So every setting has its own benefit and disadvantage. So let's go back to the settings. We explained airtime, we explained the channels and how to use them. For 5 gigahertz band, by default, it is set to 80 megahertz. In case you are deploying many access points in one location, I would strongly recommend you change it to 20 megahertz. The reason, again, the wider the channel, the less channels you have. And when you deploy many access points, you definitely need to reuse those channels. And when you create like 80 megahertz channels in your network, of course, you're going to increase the speed. However, you create another problem, which is co-channel interference, because you will end up having 2 access points that are transmitting over the same channel. And co-channel interference can have significant impact on your wireless experience. So that's something always to keep in mind. If you are deploying like 2 access points at your home, yeah, you can go with 80 megahertz increased speed. That's ideal, but when you have more access points, you definitely want to change it to 20 megahertz. All right, so these are the global settings. As we mentioned, if you need to change those settings, for example, as I showed you in our example where we had to adjust the radio power of the access point in the call center floor, I can go here and I can change it to low for both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. The other thing I want to show you is under status. So when you mount your access point and for some reason you don't remember which access point is which, the status page gives you the option to locate the access point. So by simply clicking on this icon, this specific access point will start blinking with white LEDs. So now that we talked about the access point, let's move to the SSIDs. So to add an SSID, just simply click on Add, and you can create your own SSID. Before you create your own SSID, something that is always important to do is always check the SSIDs that are used in your surroundings, especially if you're planning to use one of the security features like Rogue AP. So there is a tool here that we can use to learn about the SSIDs used in our surrounding or surrounding the access points that we're managing from this network. And these are the name of these SSIDs. For example, if you're trying to use basement, there's already another access point, basement. So that's something that you want to avoid, because you don't want to be trying to connect to the neighbor's access point. And the other thing, if you enable Rogue AP, this this SSID, and the clients that are trying to connect to it will actually be blocked from it. There's actually a video that we did about that, which is Rogue AP. If you want to learn more about it, you can watch this video right here. So after we learn about the SSIDs, we just go back here, make sure we create a unique SSID. I can call it, for example, ABC. Then enable. Client assignment, you have two options, bridge and net. So basically when you say bridge, the access point will bridge those DHCP requests to the DHCP server or the router. If you set it to net, that means the access point will be handling those DHCP requests. So it's up to you how you want to deploy your access point. And when you set that one to net, if you go under system settings, there is an option where you configure the pool for the IP addresses that you want the access point to assign to the users. So I'm just going to leave it as bridge. Of course, we want to use dual band Wi-Fi. If you want to go with 5 gigahertz, just remember that no device that uses 2.4 gigahertz will be able to connect to your SSID. If we go under access security, these are standards security stuff. You always want to go to WPA2 or WPA3, especially when you have Wi-Fi 6. There's the option to configure pre-shared key, like a password for the Wi-Fi, or you can use the 802.1x, which is the radius server, or any type of authentication server. To keep it simple, so we're just going to use the pre-shared key, then you just assign it password. If you want to use captive portal, you just check the captive portal, but before you do that, you need to create a captive portal right here. We also have a video about captive portal that we did a while ago. You can watch this video. It explains exactly how to use captive portal with Facebook, with vouchers, and with disclaimers as well. So I'm not going to be using captive portal. The MAC filter gives you the option to whitelist or blacklist the wireless clients based on the MAC address. If you choose the blacklist, these are the wireless clients that will not be able to connect to that SSID. Or if you want to restrict this SSID to only specific devices, you can just simply whitelist them. Anything that is not included in the whitelist will not be able to connect to this SSID. Client isolation is another option. This one could be useful, especially when you create an SSID for a guest, for guests. So you want to set it, for example, to internet, so that when they connect to your Wi-Fi, they can only access the internet. The other option that we have here is radio, where they can access the access point and the router. And the gateway MAC, they can access the internet and the router, in case they want to make some configuration. But for guest network, I would strongly recommend setting it to internet, so that they don't have access to other devices in your network, like printers or servers or anything like that. The other option is 802.11w. So this option, you have two options. You can disable it, set it to optional or required. If you set that one to required, if you have some legacy devices, they're not going to connect to this SSID if they don't support this standard. And this standard is for frame protection. And if you have a computer, you can actually use the command to check. Like, I think I did run it earlier. So if you go to your Windows computer, you can actually run this command right here, the net command, to see if your computer actually does support this feature. Because remember, if your computer doesn't support it, or any device in your network, if it doesn't support it and you enable it, they will not be able to connect to this SSID. So that's something that you should enable with caution. So I'm just going to leave it set to disabled. And the advanced options, there are some settings. If you want to enable them, at least have a good understanding of why you need to enable them. So the simple one is the SSID hidden, in case you want to hide your SSID. The other option is DTIM period. I would strongly recommend leaving that one set to 1. And basically, when you set it to 1, you tell the access point every time you send a beacon frame, you also send the DTM information with it. And DTM is used to wake up devices from sleeping mode. So when you set it to no to one, I'm sorry, like a low value, it makes wireless devices connection faster. And if you set it, for example, to 10, it makes it slower, but it saves the power from the power on the wireless devices. But anyway, when you set it to 10, you don't save that much power. So I would strongly leave it set to 1. You can also configure the limit of wireless clients that can connect to this SSID. So if I set it to 20, for example, only 20 wireless clients will be able to connect to this SSID. There's also the inactivity timeout after 5 minutes. If there's no activity from the wireless device, it will just be de-authenticated and removed from the connected devices. There's the option for client bridge. We also have a video about that in case you want to learn how to configure wireless bridge, which is right here. You simply go to this video and you can watch, and it shows you in details how to configure wireless bridge between two GWN access points. The other option that I want to talk about is the voice enterprise. And when you enable this option, as you can see, these 3 options are grayed out because once you enable them, you basically enable the 3 of them. You can choose one without the other, so it's up to you. But one thing to keep in mind is that when you enable the voice enterprise, you enable these 3 standards, and they only work with wireless devices that support these standards. So if you have some legacy devices that don't support them, you don't need to enable it. And this helps with mobile devices while roaming. So if you don't have roaming devices, again, you don't need to enable these settings. The problem I'm telling you don't need to enable it because some legacy devices, when they see that type of information in the beacon frame, they don't understand it, so that can create some problems at the wireless client. So if you are using, again, mobile devices, you can enable it, at least make sure that they support these standards. And these standards, they work together to make, for example, the authentication during the roaming process faster. It also helps the client learn about the neighboring access point so that they can decide which access point to connect to based on the load. Like there's this standard that is used for load balancing to balance the load between access points. The other option is op proxy. So when you enable this option and the device sends an op request, the access point will respond instead of broadcasting that op request. The only benefit of that is that you reduce the amount of traffic generated by the op request in your network. So basically, you just tell the access point, you can handle those op requests from wireless devices. So of course, after you create your SSID, you need to select the access points that you want to assign to that SSID. If this access point, you don't want it to be a member of that SSID, you simply select and remove it from the member devices. So we're almost there. So I only have a couple of things that I would like to share with you here. So if you go under clients, under status, because earlier I was talking about checking the RSSI at the wireless client and at the access point level as well. So when you have a client that is connected and it's experiencing some issues, first of all, you want to check the RSSI indicator or the signal strength indicator on their device, and then come back here and check the RSSI on the access point, because they might have a good RSSI on their wireless devices, but a weak RSSI on the access point. So that's something that indicates that we have a sticky client in that situation. The other thing you want to check is the access point. You want to check if that wireless device is connected to the access point that is actually close by. So just by looking at the name of the access point. If it's connected to an access point that is further away, well, there's an issue here. So you need to go to that access point and adjust the radio power so that remote, like devices that are further away from that access point, won't connect anymore. In case you have issues and you can't figure out what the problem is, the GWN.cloud provides us with the option to run syslog. So if you go under System, Maintenance, if you notice, for example, that there's an access point that users are complaining about because their connection keeps dropping or it's too slow or any kinds of problem, if this issue happens like every 10 minutes or every 20 minutes, just make sure you set the time here. If it's every 20 minutes or within 20 minutes, I can set that one to 20 minutes, then I can select the access points that are affected by that issue. So I only have 3, so only 3 of them will show up here. But if you have many of them, all of them are going to show up here. And then you can start the trace. And of course, you're going to set it to debug because we're interested in capturing all the data. So once you set it to debug and you select the access points, you just click on Start. The GWN will run the syslog for 20 minutes, and after it stops, you can go to the access point here, and you will have the files uploaded here. And from here, you can just simply download the file, and you can open a ticket with GrandStream support and attach those logs to help you analyze them and eventually provide some troubleshooting tips or some solutions. I think that brings us to the end of the presentation. There are a lot of settings here, but if you go to the GrandStream YouTube channel, we did a lot of videos that talk about different aspects of Wi-Fi, and I strongly recommend you go and watch them. If you want to become a GrandStream certified specialist in Wi-Fi solutions, you can go to academy.grandstream.com and you can look for the available classes. So if I click on this one, there are 2 available classes that you can take at your own and study at your own pace. So there is one about the UC solutions, like the UCM, and the networking solutions, which specializes in GWN access point. So you simply select the ones that you want to take, and you can register for the exam, and you will have access to these videos, so you can watch them at your own pace. And at the end, you can take the exam to get your certification, which is a GCS level or GrandStream certified specialist. All right, so that brings us to the end of this webinar. If you guys have any questions, we still have some time so that we can go over them. So it looks like Danny is taking care of most of the questions. Again, we still have a few more minutes in case you have any questions. Please let us know in the chat area or the Q&A section. Yeah, so I see 2 questions here about VLAN. So the GWN access points, when you create an SSID, it gives you the option to assign a VLAN to that SSID. But again, if you want to assign a VLAN, your switch and your router need to support these VLANs. So for example, if you have a VLAN created on your router, like VLAN 100, 101, and 102, you can actually create an SSID. You can call that one, for example, VLAN 200. And you just need to match the VLAN tag on your router. If you have the VLAN created with 200, you just add the value 200 so that the access point will tag those VLANs with the 200. The other option that I want to show you is under access points. Let me go back here. Yeah. So the other option is the net port type on the access point. As you know, it comes with 2 ports. There's the option where you can configure it as a trunk so that the traffic is not tagged, or you can configure it as access port where you can specify the VLAN you want to use for that port. Yeah, another thing that I would like to mention here is if you guys have any questions regarding sales, you can contact your distributor or your supplier. If you want to contact Grandstream directly, you can use the company and contact us. And it gives you 2 options here, the sales and the support. So in case you have sales related questions, you can use this page right here and you can submit your questions to us and somebody will get back to you with the answer. So Ahmed is asking how to assign different VLANs to same SSID. No, only one VLAN can be assigned per SSID. You can't assign multiple VLANs to the same SSID. Yeah, so talking about the VLAN, yes. If you configure the net port with access mode, it will definitely tag the traffic with the VLAN that you assign to that port, which is right here. I think we've answered most of the questions. Again, if you guys have, I think we will still host another mini training session like this probably in a few weeks or in a couple of months. You can always check the Grandstream website for the upcoming webinars, and you can attend the next webinar. We will review your questions, of course, and we will add them to the next training, so we can include all your requests. So with that, thanks everyone for taking the time to join me today in this mini training session. And I wish you learned something from today's training, and have a great day, and I'll see you in the next webinar. Thank you guys.